The bright side of addiction is recovery. And recovery is its own best reward. Hi, everybody. I'm Neil Scott. And if you are new to our podcast, we welcome you. And by golly, if you've been here before, hey, welcome back. And if you're in recovery or know or love someone who is, or maybe you simply want to know more about the recovery process, or maybe you're a bit concerned about someone you know or love who is harmfully using alcohol or any other drug, this is the podcast for you. We carry the message of hope and the promise of recovery, and a reminder that you can find all of our podcasts at recoverycoasttocoast.org. Recent episodes have featured interviews with Broadway legend Ben Vereen, NFL greats Thomas Hollywood Henderson and Ryan Leaf, plus the late, great Peter Yarrow from Peter, Paul, and Mary, plus conversations with everyday people in long-term recovery. They share their story, their insight, and their path. Now, in this edition of Recovery Coast to Coast, a powerful conversation with attorney David Hobler. He has been in long-term recovery 33 years. He had a relapse. That lasted 3 years, and he suffered the death of 2 of his children. His path to recovery takes many twists and turns. Here's a quick clip from today's podcast.
I replenish and enhance my sobriety by reaching out to others who know about drinking, either personally or through family or friends or employment, and don't believe there's any help for this particular loved one, because over and over and over again, it just keeps getting worse. It's a hopeless condition of mind and body, as our preface had us believing. When I travel, I find somebody I know and I get a meeting scheduled and I prepare.
My conversation with attorney David Hobler is coming right up. And we'll conclude our podcast with some thoughts on recovery from rock and roll icon Joe Walsh. Our website is recoverycoasttocoast.org. If you would like to help us out financially, or if you know of a foundation that may be interested in underwriting our program, well, we'd be very, very grateful. A reminder that our email address is recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. We'd love to hear from you. Recovery Coast to Coast, supported by Sundown M Ranch, one of America's oldest, least expensive, and most successful treatment programs. They are listed in Newsweek magazine's recent list of America's top treatment providers. No one wakes up, on a bright, sunny spring day and says, I think I'll do something about my drinking. It doesn't work that way. Usually takes a crisis, perhaps an intervention, to face the reality that addiction is a life-threatening, chronic, progressive disease that will only get worse unless you get professional help. Now, that's where Sundown M Ranch comes in. They have been successfully treating adults, adolescents, and family members for nearly 60 years. They know what it takes to help an individual find that long-term recovery path. And if a treatment center says that they can cure an addiction, stay away. Bad actor. Most likely they're just after your money. Sundown M Ranch is not like that. They're a not-for-profit treatment program. Their bottom line is long-term recovery, not financial profit. They have an amazing, well-trained, well-paid staff, they love working there, that provide the best treatment possible. Many of them are in recovery themselves. Some actually went through Sundown many years ago. Now, because they are a not-for-profit, they own their own land, which is on 30 acres at the mouth of the beautiful Yakima River Canyon in central Washington, not too far from Seattle. You can find out a lot more about Sundown M Ranch by visiting their website, sundown.org. And one of the great things about Sundown is that they provide a bridge back into the community, the family, the workplace. I cannot stress enough how important that transition is to long-term recovery. And they take most insurance plans. When people ask me what's the best treatment center in the country, I usually give them my top 3 because there are, frankly, a lot of good treatment programs out there. But Sundown M Ranch, That's at the top of my list. Sundown's where recovery begins. Check them out, sundown.org. Well, it's conversation and coffee time. Coffee and a recovering talk with an attorney who today helps people find the treatment they need. Now, his journey is an amazing one, having lived through the death of 2 of his children, a 3-year relapse, and living life on life's terms. Here is my candid conversation with David Hobler. Well, a very interesting guest is joining us. His name is David Hobler. And David, oddly enough, lives in Seattle, and I just found that out. He was referred to me by another guest that we had on a few weeks back, Toby H. Toby said, you got to get a hold of this guy. And he's been in sobriety, in recovery for the last 33 years. He has an incredible story to tell. And let's begin, David, back at the beginning for you, the drinking and the using, and what led you to that decision some 33 years ago.
You know, I called for help 46 years ago because I had been dehydrated on a 10-mile run one morning and stopped for a little liquid refreshment. And I had 24 ounces of beer, parked my car at a house I was renting, couldn't find my car keys, and punched out a window to reach around and open up the front door. And my 5-year-old son pushed the door open, looked at a bloody forearm of mine, and said, "Pa, you need to get help." So I called for help. About 4 hours later, my wife at the time took my 5-year-old and my 3-year-old daughter and said, "We're leaving." I got a hold of a woman on the phone, and she said, "I'll call you back in 10 minutes. And then she did and said, "I've got Herb to pick you up at 5:30. Don't drink anymore." And I went to a sober meeting that evening in a beautiful church, and the speaker was on a podium with a 3-piece suit, and I immediately began taking his inventory because I wore 3-piece suits to court. I was a lawyer. I knew who friend and foe was, and this guy seemed to know what he was talking about, so I was full of fear, too. About halfway through his 45-minute talk, it was an hour meeting, a drunk stood up in the second row. I was in row 8, and Herb, who was sitting next to me, he threw his hand down on my thigh and said, "David, just sit still and watch." And the speaker jumped off the stage and held out his arms. The drunk collapsed into his arms. About 10 minutes later, the drunk left with his driver. The speaker got on the podium and said, "That was me 15 years ago. I've been sober 8 years in San Quentin, and I'm on parole right now." And I believed him because I'd worked with inmates in Hawaii, and I'd worked with captive soldiers who had been sprayed by Agent Orange and self-mutilated and had been charged with crimes in Hawaii. And I thought, it's time, David, that you got off your podium and began to learn to concede to your innermost self that you can't be cured, but you sure can help others.
And where does the story go from that point?
At that point, it went to a incident 2.5 years later.
Did you continue to go to sobriety meetings?
I went to 4 a week. I got a recovery counselor named Bill, and it was in the East Bay and I picked Bill up half an hour before the meeting, and we drive to a meeting. We began picking up newcomers for their first meeting at recovery homes. We had a meeting before the meeting, at the meeting, and after the meeting. I stayed rigorously sober, and then I flew back to Hawaii, and I began teaching in the law school there and working in corrections for parolees. I eventually relapsed when my son was hit by a car and never walked again. That was 10 years later. He survived. He had been instrumental in nudging me in the kitchen every Thursday to call Bill and get out of the house and pick Bill up on time. And my daughter, who was 2 years younger, did the same thing, and they championed my recovery those first 10 years. After the relapse, my wife and I broke up, and my son was in a wheelchair. I got involved with the American with Disabilities Act. I referenced the need for accommodation for his daily needs, and he drove me in his adapted vehicle to a recovery center where I became a staff member and got prisoners out of San Quentin and jail to fill the recovery center and get checks paid by the jurisdiction directly to my friend Mike N., who had formed the recovery center and was director.
How long were you in relapse, David?
I was in relapse off and on, and I was putting up my hand as a newcomer for 3 years, 89 to 92.
What happened that it put you into a situation where you found long-term recovery, and what was different?
What was different was that a 75-year-old woman, this was shortly before 92, at a meeting took me aside after the meeting and said that she had become an alcoholic after one of her 8 daughters had died, and that my grief was not an excuse to drink, and that she had gotten sober at a recovery center. And she gave me the name, and I said, I know the director of that recovery center. I helped him start it. And she said, yeah, but does he know you're drinking? And I said, well, I haven't talked to him in a couple of years. Why? And she said, just give him a call and see what he has to say. Her name was Lyda. And I called. I said, Mike, David Hobler again. Oh, David, yeah, I've been waiting for your call. I said, what do you mean? He said, I heard about your son. And I said, I need help, Mike. He said, well, it's 7:30 on my watch, and you have until 11 o'clock on my watch tonight to get here. I've got one bed with your name on it. Can you do that? And I said, well, yes. And there'd been an intervention done on me by family earlier in the day. And they had a treatment center all picked out for me, but I knew Mike, and I went out there. And after 28 days, he gave me a hug on Thanksgiving. He looked at his calendar, Neil, and he counted 8 days, and he said, you'll be drunk by the 6th of November. I've read your discharge plans. You're going right back to the community where your son was hit by a car. Where are you going to sleep? In that futon in the back of your Forerunner where you were sleeping before you called me? He said, you're going to stay here, and I'm going to give you lodging and food. You're still a lawyer, and you're going to go to court and get me clients. So that's what I did.
Wow, that's quite a saga there, David.
Well, it doesn't have much to do with being a lawyer as such, because, Neil, I was in court and a judge put up his hand like a cop, and I stopped talking. I was on my feet. He said, Mr. Hobler, this judge was sober. I didn't know he was sober. And he took me and the other attorney, a DA, into his chambers. And he took off his robe, and he stood up, and he said, your client has told me in open court he's a sick man and needs help. Is that true, Mr. Hobler? And I said, yes, it is, Your Honor. Do you have a recovery center in mind? I do, Your Honor. Serenity Knolls. which was about 15 miles north. Oh, that place. I'm lucky to have been out there myself. I talked out there. And then he began dropping coins in a glass pot, and I looked closely, and they were sobriety chips. And I didn't need to say another word. So it helped to find sober judges, sober probation officers. You may know AA started in San Quentin prison with Warden Duffy in 1950 at the International Convention. Duffy is talking alongside Bill Wilson, the founder of AA. Duffy called it the greatest prison management tool that any warden could develop. But that sounds very learned. What's happened to me, my son in a wheelchair died in 95, and with AA and grief group and men's group, I stayed sober, and my daughter died just 4 years ago in August 2001, and I've been in the community finding meaning where she died by presence and care for two of her sons, my grandsons. Stepping forward, I've taken a grief group with men, which I currently attend. As in the 12th step, the awakening I had was that this is part of my life, and I can move forward and trudge the road and find friends. You and I met 45 minutes ago. I mean, it's like blink your eyes and see what's in front of you now.
You know, I often say that grief is love with no place to go. And you had kind of a double whammy on that. During those times, did you have the urge to drink again?
No, I wouldn't be satisfied. What I learned from a couple of old timers was not that they drank too much, they couldn't drink enough. My daughter drowned in the Puget Sound.
Oh my.
Off a paddleboard, swimming toward it. That was 4 years ago. I don't want to die. The death I had in coming to believe in the process of recovery, not in a higher power as such, but in nature and in service and in unity. I got help from men who had lost children to suicide. I believed in their message and I belonged. My cup of sobriety today as I talk to you is no guarantee tomorrow when I wake up that it's a cure for tomorrow. My years, I don't mention them often except when in confidence and in tribute to you and the common purpose we serve. I heard a speaker once, and when it came for a countdown, there was somebody with 50 years and somebody with 45. And Harry left the podium before he was drinking coffee with a group that had come from a treatment center. And when he closed his speech to end the conference, 40 minutes later, he said, "You may have seen me walk away." He said, "I have 45 years. When I was sponsoring somebody 42 years ago, the speaker kept talking about how he had 15 years and 15 years. And my sponsee next to me said, "Mr. Taylor, this guy on the podium doesn't know a thing about how I feel now." His sponsee had 9 months. Harry's farewell was time and grade. It counts as long as you're moving forward. Your gear shift has a forward, has no neutral, has no reverse.
There's a term that's used in the professional field called relapse prevention. A lot of treatment programs have relapse prevention programs. I'd no longer use that term, David. I use the term recovery enhancement. I want to know how your recovery is different today than it was yesterday. And what are you doing to enhance your recovery going forward? And I think that's what you're saying.
Well, in 2 days, I fly to Door County, Wisconsin, where I grew up in diapers. and I'm participating in a forum for others walking on forest trails that overlook Lake Michigan. I replenish and enhance my sobriety by reaching out to others who know about drinking, either personally or through family or friends or employment, and don't believe there's any help for this particular loved one, because over and over and over again, it just keeps getting worse. It's a hopeless condition of mind and body, as our preface had us believing. When I travel, I find somebody I know and I get a meeting schedule, and I prepare.
No matter where you go, there are people in recovery. There are AA meetings around the globe.
Absolutely. Absolutely. College campuses and high school campuses, workplaces, they know more about that now rather than firing somebody who's a rainmaker. They send them to treatment. Neil, I want to stress, I've got lots to learn. Almost 10 years ago, I had a friend who got sober. I'd met him professionally, and he called me in sobriety and said, Hobler, I want you to come out and meet some people. And I flew into Minneapolis and I went up to Hazleton and I met some people. One of the personnel drove me back to the airport after 3 days and said, well, what do you think, David? Would you recommend our place? I said, well, it costs a lot. And he laughed and he said, well, there may be a reduction in that. Let me make sure I have your phone number. And he did. And I got a call back from a friend of the staff member who said, well, it's your time now to show up on campus and learn more. I spent 14 months on the Hazleton campus getting what they call a graduate degree and licensed in advanced therapy from Hazleton. What it did was give me a piece of paper that gave me my name and a number, so I don't have to explain myself when I walk in behalf of somebody who needs treatment in a courthouse or in an employment office. I love talking to you. These virtual meetings that COVID did put on, wow, I miss the in-person stuff, but every little bit helps. So I graduated in 2014 from Hazleton in that program. I'm lucky to be talking to you right now and tapping my toe. If I can help you in your recovery coast to coast, dial me in.
I appreciate that. Let me ask you this before we conclude the chat, David. What does recovery mean to you today?
Well, one thing it means is loving my ancestry. My grandparents, my parents, my two children have all predeceased me. It gives me good orderly direction. When my heels hit the floor, my son would say in his wheelchair, Pa, get out of bed. It's time. You can walk. It's a new learning, and it's a process. I'm an athlete, and I always was as a little kid. You know, they talked in 1972 about the runner's high, and there was a book written by an MD called Positive Addiction by William Glasser in 1974.
I'm familiar with it.
I get enthusiastic. I try not to talk too much. I can't keep it unless I give it away. Humility and responsibility are my two biggest character defects. Like Michelangelo chipping away at granite to get his statue of David made. You and other people chip away at my granite and help make me real.
Your story, David, is very powerful, and I'm sure it will help others along the way in listening to this broadcast, as well as you sharing on, a daily, weekly, monthly basis wherever you go. Because as we talked before we went on the air, you recover out loud. You are an example of what recovery should be. I say the bright side of addiction is recovery. Most people don't think of a bright side of addiction or a bright side of alcoholism. The truth of the matter is recovery is absolutely an amazing way of life, and it's become an American way of life. There are more and more people who are in recovery, and there are certainly more and more people in need of recovery, and you are a signpost for those people. I appreciate very much your story. I appreciate your insight, and I appreciate your enthusiasm in wanting to reach out and help others because, as you said, you can't keep it unless you give it away. I hope you've enjoyed my conversation with David, who puts recovery where his heart is. By the way, I want to remind listeners of this podcast that if you would like to tell your story of recovery, regardless of the path you've chosen, and as long as you have been in continuous recovery for at least 1 year or more, do drop us a note, recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. Coming up next, rock and roll legend Joe Walsh. He's got some thoughts on alcoholism and recovery. That'll be in just 30 seconds.
She has always been your baby. But when your daughter got into drugs and alcohol, she turned into a stranger. What do you do? Where do you turn? Contact Sundown M Ranch. Sundown's nationally recognized youth treatment program guides young people back to a life free of drugs and alcohol. All treatment is gender-specific and directed by caring certified professionals in a safe environment. You can get your daughter back and get to know her again. Go to www.sundown.org to learn more.
And now, as promised, let's hear from a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and a person who lives his recovery out loud, Joe Walsh.
If you have problems in your life that are directly the result of alcohol or whatever substance you're doing, you have a problem. And at some point, you work for it. It doesn't work for you anymore. And very subtly, without you noticing, whatever you're on will convince you that you can't do anything without it. And then it's got you. I chased it for 30 years, and it wasn't working for me. And I thought, oh, well, obviously I'm not drinking nearly enough. And that wasn't it. I needed help. And the hardest thing to do, the phone can weigh 30 pounds, pick up the phone and ask for help. Because there's life after addiction, and it's good.
Well, that wraps up this edition of Recovery Coast to Coast, the national podcast. If you've enjoyed our podcast, please share it with at least one other person. You can find all of our podcasts at recoverycoasttocoast.org. And if you'd like to get in touch, our email is recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. Also, please hit the subscribe or follow button. It's free, and you'll be notified the next time we publish a podcast. If you're considering treatment for a friend or a loved one, be sure and visit naatp.org/AID. That stands for the Addiction Information Directory. It's a list of those treatment programs that adhere to strict ethical guidelines. One of them is Sundown M Ranch, but there are thousands of other good treatment programs around as well. And join us next time for America's Voice for Recovery, Recovery Coast to Coast, the national podcast. And another shout out to our sponsoring organization, Sundown M Ranch, where recovery begins. Sundown.org. I'm Neil Scott, reminding you to stay healthy, live in gratitude, and be kind to others. Remember, the bright side of addiction is recovery. Pass it on.